Blackthorne's story was the beginning, sort of Blizzard learning to tell stories. We had a little bit of it with Lost Vikings, but it was so tongue-in-cheek as to almost not be serious. But Blackthorne, we start to kind of take ourselves a little bit serious in our writing and how we think about stories and character development. The idea for Blackthorne came from a couple other games that were among the first to use rotoscoping. One was called Flashback, and I think it was on console, and I remember seeing that and just thinking, oh my God, the animations are so lifelike, they're amazing. Had never seen anything like that before. We just thought, wow, we have to do something like this.
They looked at that game and it was, it was beautiful. It wasn't the game they wanted to make, but they really wanted to get that nice kind of just smooth motion.
And seeing those games was something we felt like, hey, we can do that too. We can make a game that looks like that and has those kinds of sensibilities. And so it led to the creation of Blackthorne, where it's actually like a rotoscoped game. And for those who don't know what rotoscoping is, that's where you film somebody and watch their motions and then either mimic those motions in drawing or just paint right over the video.
So what they did is they filmed us doing the various actions of the character in the game with a broom or a stick for the gun. And I remember like lunging forward like, 100 times so that they could film that. And
I remember the day we brought the video camera in. One of the guys brought in a ladder. It might have been Stu Rose. And we were climbing up and down the ladder, filming ourselves, and then, taking it back and getting it into the computer frame by frame to see what those sprites might look like.
Stu had this idea to take Frank out in the back of the backfield behind the office and have him run and walk and jump and do all these things and then film him from the side doing them all and then use that as the inspiration for the animations that he was creating for the main character. And Stu went out and filmed him running and jumping, doing all those things. He brought them back in and then started using them as the guide for doing the actual animations. And then I think he even was able at one point be able to get the video into the computer, which at that time was a very difficult thing to do. And then he just drew over them. But that's how the main animations were originally made. The other animations with him climbing and doing all the things that Frank didn't do in the backyard were Stu just being a great artist and being able to match that look and feel.
And they did it over and over and over again, like, oh, your foot placement was wrong. We need to get like 2 full steps. We just didn't have enough space to do it correctly against a background that was really blank. There's nowhere else that we could do it because we didn't have a sound studio or anything. People were running around with guns and crawling and dodging and ducking with different implements in their hand to simulate what gun combat would look like. If you look at the way that Super Nintendo artwork is drawn, it's composed into a bunch of 8x8 blocks of pixels called cells. And so the challenge is you want to minimize the number of cells that you're using to try and keep the game size small. And so rotoscoped artwork, it seems like a great cost savings. Hey, we'll just record people and then we can use that in the game. But it had to be drawn over really extensively. It seems like a great cost savings, but really it was an enormous amount of work for the artists to take that video and convert it into something that could be used for the game.
And we would go through this elaborate process to cut out the character, and then we would take those frames and we would draw over them meticulously with the 15 colors that we were allowed. And what we ended up doing was, instead of rotoscoping, we said, how many frames does this character have to do? Oh, 16? Okay, we'll just do a 16-frame animation, and we'll just kind of put that rotoscoping stuff to the side. We did it once or twice. It was the biggest pain in the butt, and then we figured out we're just gonna do it ourselves. Just make a guy climb a ladder for 16 frames, and lo and behold, it looks so smooth and lifelike and fluid. So we were used to games where we had 3 frames, 5 frames of animation in Lost Vikings, so having 16 made it feel like we were just creating these most beautiful animations the world had ever seen.
We just wanted to try our hand at something a little bit different. We'd done Lost Vikings, we'd done Rock and Roll Racing. Those were both really tongue-in-cheek. Back in those days, we really liked pushing ourselves and liked creating new things, different things. So different game types, in this case, different stories in a different tone.
I'm asked a lot about Blackthorne and why Blackthorne was so different from Lost Vikings, which was very, very colorful and happy and sweet and very Nintendo type, Mario type feel to it. we pulled back from that and then started coming up with the ideas for how the game would look. So Sam and Ron and the other artists started coming up with ideas and doing some things. And Sam hit, I believe it was Sam that hit a really good idea for how some of the levels would look and stuff like that. So we started designing levels based on how those looks would be. The whole thing about Blackthorne rests on one thing. If at the very beginning of the game, you have Kyle. Kyle's there and he's got his shotgun. And that was what the whole game was about. We were thinking about Ash and the Evil Dead. We were thinking about Big Trouble in Little China. We were thinking about Escape from New York. We were thinking about all of these visions where it's just this hero, this more anti-hero who just, you know what, let's just go in with a shotgun and clear it all out, you know. It was just a lot of fun, and yes, it was very dark, but it was very much in line with the sense of humor we had.
So we had just made Lost Vikings, Rock and Roll Racing, and we were working on Blackthorne. Blackthorne was even a little bit heavier and a little bit darker to begin with. Originally, this character, he didn't even have a name yet, but he was searching for these missing kids. There was this little cinematic that we did where the newspaper says, child missing, this and that. And so basically, the story was at the time where there was this detective guy searching for these kids, and he found that they were taken to this other realm. And he was going to go through and try to rescue them. And so we still have that idea of a person from our world going to this other world, but we changed it around a bit because it was just feeling too heavy. It felt a little more of a darker R-rated movie than sort of a PG-13 that Blackthorne ended up being.
Some of it was just a function of the ideas that we had. Some of it was a function of the games that we were playing. And with Blackthorne, I would point to some of the games that we were playing at the time as well, because I remember playing a whole lot of Wolfenstein 3D in the office, and that was pretty dark and gritty. And so those first-person shooters that were dark and gritty were something we were playing at the time, and I think we thought we could sort of bring that gritty experience to the platformer space.
For Blackthorne, the idea behind it was, there was a guy with long hair and a shotgun going around killing monsters. It was a very nightmarish setting, so the idea there was to highlight the weirdness of this nightmare that he'd fallen into, sort of a living nightmare that you can't wake up from.
Blackthorne was our first anti-hero. He was a hero, but he was kind of a bad guy or a tough guy, or, he played on the darker side of the street, right? We had this long, black-haired character, dubious nature. So you can see a little bit of the elements of Blackthorne in characters like Illidan and characters like Arthas. Bad guys, sometimes good guys, of dubious nature. But I believe the birth from them came from our first anti-hero, Kyle Blackthorne.
And when I think about the early days of Blackthorne, I'm sure we experimented with a few different things. I don't remember exactly what we experimented with in terms of his kit, but once we landed on the shotgun, and it just was amazing and so visceral and so satisfying, we knew that was the weapon for the game.
Even though it was sort of silly in some ways, and when you're doing shotgun combat, you duck back into sometimes nothing. You just sort of stand back and well, why can't you be shot there? You're just standing. But it didn't really matter, right? It played well and it was fun, and so it was an enjoyable game experience. And I think at the time it was probably the most violent game that had been done on Super Nintendo, and really showed people the extremes that Nintendo would allow on their system.
I think the appeal of Blackthorne comes from the fact that it's a really good escape, because it's basically you as a human being placed in an unhuman world and then having to survive it and work your way through it. I think that we put some pretty good hidden things in there. I think that as people find them, they find that it's not just a walk left to right or right to left or up and down. There's a lot of puzzle, there's a lot of thought put into it. It really was a solid game. So there was a lot of those kind of things where it was just everything was actually interactive. We tried to make anything and everything move or do something or part of the storyline.
So one of the cool things about Blackthorne is it had Blizzard's very first orc. I don't know if you remember it, but there would be the little bad guys that you fought, and then when they shot you, they would go, ha, ha, ha. Right? They're basically orcs. They have little chainmail on, they have the sort of orky bulldog face with the little tusks, and we made them green, we made them blue, we've made them red, and so far I think Warcraft has had red and green orcs. No blue ones yet, maybe, we'll see. WoW team, listen up. But that's a fun little side note, I think, that many people wouldn't have known, is that the first Blizzard orcs were in Blackthorne. Now, wait a minute, I'm actually thinking, I think our first orc might have actually been in Rock and Roll Racing as one of the bad guys that you play against. I think it was Bogmire, and it was the character for that. So, two fun little anecdotes for you. Blizzard and orcs, since 1993.